think we're there, folks. I think it's time. Welcome. Thank you for coming out tonight. Welcome to our 6th lecture of the Friends of Scarborough Marsh lecture series. Tonight we're going to have a talk by Dr. Bruce Thurlow on the Scarborough Marsh from Agriculture to Recreation. My name's Steve Panett, and I'm a member of the board for the Friends. There are several other board members here. Peggy out back and Stephanie. Ann, do you folks stand? I'm Greg. Greg? Oh, I didn't see it. Sorry, I didn't see it. So these are the folks that are helping guide the. And in the back we have one of the charter members of the Friends, C.D. Armstrong. And Bruce is a former member of the board as well, so we're well represented. So as most of you know, we're a nonprofit dedicated to conservation and restoration and of the marsh, and educational series like this are one of the ways that we educate people about the marsh so we can move our mission forward. So before I introduce Bruce, I'd like to remind you of 2 lectures we have coming. I think it's next Tuesday, May 1st. Dr. Noah Thurlow from Department of Environmental Studies at University of New England is going to talk about the Gap Track project. That's on the Eastern Trail section, the gap between the Scarborough section and the South Portland section. He has some game cameras out there. He's been monitoring the game activity before construction. He's going to monitor during construction and then post-construction. So he's going to be speaking about that next Tuesday with his students. And then May 23rd, Dr. Rachel Beauvier with our Beauvier Consulting is going to talk about salt marsh economics. So I hope you'll show up. Before I let Bruce take off, I have a few words to say about him. Bruce is a lifelong Scarborough resident. He was raised in Pine Point, and he and his wife Peggy raised their 3 sons in Blue Point. Is that correct? He graduated from Scarborough High School in 1956, the year I was born.
Thank you.
He attended Durham State Teachers College, where he earned a Bachelor of Science degree, and then he taught junior high school for 7 years. And then he took his family and went to the University of Maine at Orono and got a master's degree and a PhD in education. Then he came back and resettled in Scarborough and worked for the Cable Island School System as Director of Special Studies. Then they tagged him to, after 4 years, they liked him so much, tagged him to be superintendent until 1985 when he decided to retire and set up his own private practice in psychology, which morphed into psychology and special education, tutoring, and Children's Day Center. So once he retired in 2000, he became a board member of Friends of Scarborough Marsh, served with Project Grace and the Scarborough Historical Society, and he's now retired from all nonprofit activity and for-profit. Bruce, take it away.
Thank you very much. I have a love of the marsh because I was one of those people, and I told this to CD when I joined, why I joined the Friends of Scarborough Marsh, because I was one of those people who did damage to the marsh. Gasoline, oil you put in your boat to go lobstering, throw the can overboard. You know, that's, and everybody was doing that in the beginning, or in the 50s, 60s. So tonight what I'd like to do, and I said this to Steve, is talk about the old days in the marsh, the building of the dikes. I'll show you that. I'll show you actually how to build one. You might want to go home and do that. But today, thank goodness, the marsh is appreciated by a lot of people, I think most of the people. And it's now recreational. We go on the bridge of the trail, Eastern Trail. We can go hunting if we are in the ducks because, or anything. The Duck Unlimited was helpful to us as we restored good part of the marsh. So tonight, I'm going to have you see what I see. We're going to go through some pictures, and I'm going to go back to some pictures that you're going to see, and I'm going to tell you what they mean. And thirdly, I'm going to tell you some things I don't think anyone knows. Yeah, that's how that's get people. would help if I looked at it. I wanted to put that in first because they were first. That particular picture came out of what was the Atlantic House rooms.
If you care for a chair, there's one right here behind
That's
this.
okay, thank you. But I wanted it there because the Native Americans use the marsh a lot, the same way that we do. They have clams by galore. And if it wasn't for the marsh, there would be no clams for anybody, which we'll get into later. Thank you. I want you to pay very close attention to something here. I work this.
This is the very top one. But turn it up.
Well, perhaps.
It's very top.
Thank you very much. This is something that Linda years ago had and gave me a copy. And what is really important that I want you to see.
It's the turn it completely around. It's
Oh.
opposite from what we have.
Oh, this is, oh, okay. Doing something wrong. Good night. Mine.
This one.
Yeah, I thought it was over there. Thank you. See. Oh, boy. It showed up once. Anyway, what I would like you to look at is not only the yellow and the white, it just kind of shows that the marsh is all around those rivers. But what I also want you to know is the rivers were the roads for the longest time in Scarborough. When colonists came here, that's what they used. They didn't, because there was no roads. Most of Scarborough was trees. Even one of the fellows that worked on one of the dikes that I'm going to talk about, he was given land property of the oak trees that he cut down. He could have the land. So he had a pasture after a while. It took a while. So the stones you see, the stone fences and stuff that you see around, they were made by the pump. They put them over onto a fence, the big rocks, but they also had to clear their land. Okay, so, and everything, of course, was done by hand. By hand is what you're going to see very soon. Thank you. You can take a look at that, because if you come to the Historical Society, on one of the walls is something that talks about Scarborough. To the next piece, please. And what you're seeing is property that people owned on the marsh. Now, bear in mind that no Route 1, no turnpike at that time. A fellow by the name of Moses Bank surveyed all this area of the big marsh. It was so good, so welcome that, would you give me that one? That, no, I'm sorry, can't go back one. Go back one? This Moses Bank drawing, the map itself was so good that it was accepted by Dr. Southgate, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But it was so good that later on, when Maine became a state in 1820, 20 years later, it just was taken into the Cumberland County Court, and that was it. It was that good. And it showed who owned what part of the lake, of the marsh. So when we get a little later on and we talk about how the state came in, it was owned by private people. So private people who could do what they wanted to do. This other thing that you just did. There was a professor by the name of Brian Robinson who did a survey of the river, the Scarborough River. And he told me at one time when I was at well, I called him up. I wasn't at Orono. Go on. He said, Bruce, it's too bad you're not the Jolly Green Giant. All you'd have to do is take your spatula and lift it up, and you'd be surprised what you'd find underneath. He did a survey of the river, the Scarborough River. It's called Dunson River, it's called Blue Point River, it's called lots of things, but it's the one on the right. I mean on the left. There's your look. The issue is that he made a proposal of anthropology that said that marsh was made, helped being made thousands of years ago by the ice freezing on top of some gravel. And so when the spring came and started going down the river, it melted and the gravel was dropped. Hold that thought for just a minute. They're going down the river, because I'm going to show you a lady who was on the river. Thank you. He also told me a place to go see. He thought I'd be interested in it. Well, I was very interested. Thank God I was a kid that grew up digging clams, because I walked along at dead low water, the tide, near a place called Seavy's Landing. I don't know if you know what that is. For those that don't, if you drive down the Pine Point Road, the Congregational Church, brick church is right there. That's Seavy's Landing Road. Okay, so you go down there, and as you go down there, he wanted me to look at these stubs that you're looking at. Because there's a part of an old boat, there's some stakes still standing, there's some nubs. That's what that picture is. It's not a Picasso, it's just a picture. That really told me that the Indians and the colonial people had weirs, because Millbrook comes right across and meets the river right at that point. So that's one of the things that Brian helped me with, as well as the building of the tide gate. Now, you can go to the next one, please. I wanted to sign in for Honeywell House, and I want a Honeywell House next, please. That's sort of what it looks like after 1976. Because in 1976, we had the 200th anniversary of our country, and it was moved across the street where it is now. It used to be across the street, and before that, this is why I want to begin. Before that, as you go down the Black Point Road, you'll see marsh on either side of you, right? On the Sunset River, the Liberty's River, you'll see marshland. Well, nothing of diking occurred over in those sections, so there's nothing I can say about that. I'm going to take you back to Nelson in just a minute, because that's where it happened. Except for Cape Elizabeth and Scarborough, which I'll tell you about. The other reason I put that in there is when it was first built, it was built, if you're going down the road from Amados, on the left side, out in that marsh. But it was built far enough out where it's almost like on the base of Pleasant Hill, okay? So it was moved once over to Mr. Nye's house and was used for a chicken coop. It was moved across the street to celebrate the second 200 years anniversary. But it's the oldest house in Scarborough. It's maintained by the association, the Historical Association, but the Garden Club does a lot of work for us on that. Thank you. I wanted to show you those things just to show you that there is evidence, because when that first was built, it was on the marsh, as I told you on the left. It was called Jembico in those days. And the thing I'm not going to do is interfere each time and tell you stories about, I could tell you a story about how you get to different places. Go to that rock, go to that birch tree, go by the left side of his house, Honeywell's, you're home. Because the house was moved. Okay, thank you. So, in our early days, a lot of things happened. Let's come up to some closer days. This slide shows, if you're going down the Pine Point Road, you have just passed the Nature Center. You've just passed, okay? You're going to come to a place where the river looks like somebody threw it, straight as an arrow. That's the side. Right over here, I have to get close to show you this. I'm going to show you another picture in a minute. Did you see these trees? Okay. If you see the trees on the Pine Point Road by the Nature Center, nobody planted those. They just started to grow. So one of the one of the possibilities of the marsh is that the birds from the south would get mud on and feed, obviously, but sometimes some seeds would stick to it. So that's one of the things that might have been causal. The marsh might have also had a lot of trees and was much smaller than it is today. Very likely, because those trees have grown since the road was put in the 60s. Okay. What I want to show you is that if you think about it, and if you've ridden across the Pine Point Road, on the other side, you see this great big culvert here. You see the water coming down. One of the things that became real important for us was hydrology in the marsh, how much water level can be. And you're going to see in Pine Point, you're going to see a couple of schooners. Never today could they come in, since the railroads and the dikes and a few things were built. But I'm going to show you now. We'll start with what I hoped we would do. Excuse me, could you help me pick that up? I can't bend anymore. Thank you. I had the drop seats or something. Right along, this is the Eastern Trail, where the old railroad line was at one time. What I can remember of the old railroad track. There was a freight business on that track. And then Bethel and Maine came along after a while, and it was two rails. What I want to show you is this right here. I'm going to show you several pictures of this. See those stakes? I don't know how many of you have seen those as you go down by Pine Point as logs in the river, but they stay there all the time. Since I was big enough to go up and see them, they've been there. Please. Where I just pointed, would you bet me up one? Where I just pointed, I just want to say to you that this, see this line? It's coming over because a Professor Siebold, who has done a lot of work on dikes, and a lot of work on dikes on the eastern coast of the United States, said that we're lucky in Scarborough. We're lucky because everything was made of wood. Down you get in New Jersey, sometimes they use iron, and that just plain was tough. So we could do a lot of recouping of marshland because it's built with wood. I have been told by a fellow named Joe Lothrop that that's right, no, you can go, that's good, Steve. This is just, if I kept coming from that, to the oak over here, this is the pumping station today for the sewer, okay? But this is right in this area, and right across the street, there were two different barns that the men used to use to store the hay before they took it home, before it was theirs. There's someplace to put it out of the way. And so we didn't have a barn, but we wanted to show you where it would be. It would be at the end of that. She, Professor Siebold, and her husband, who also is a professor of history, came down to the Nature Center, rented a canoe. It was dead low water, and went down and looked all over these logs. And she said, my goodness, it must have been not only a dike, it's got the sluice face, which I'll show you, but it also had a bridge on top of it, which was not uncommon. If you're going to cross the river and bring your stuff across from the river, you need a bridge. So a dike sometimes has bridges. This one did. This one, when we get to it, will be the Southgate Company Bridge, not Dr. Southgate. Okay, thank you. Now, just for a minute, what I hope to show you is some of these things. We've gone through, in the old days, real old days, everything was privately owned. And it was true that people would go out and cut some grass, saltwater marsh grass for their animals. A lot of these settlers, the early pioneers who came here looking for grass. There was, again, no pasture land. And they wanted to feed the horses, of course, or whatever, the goats they had, or whatever they had for livestock. So we've done that. Now we're going to talk about dikes. Okay? Please. This gentleman, Dr. Southgate, he was a doctor, a physician. He came to Scarborough and it's said in several books, that he came into Scarborough and had all his belongings with him, which accounted for both saddlebags being full of something, whatever it was. That's all he had. But he enjoyed law more than physician work, so he became a lawyer. After becoming a lawyer, he became a justice of the peace for Scarborough, which at that time was very, very important, because he made all the decisions. Okay? He also liked farming a great deal. He was a very, very, not a bright person, but a very good citizen. He married one of Richard King's children. Richard King had 3 kids. One was William King, the governor, first governor, Rufus King, who happened to be a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and then Mary King, who married him, married Southgate. That Southgate building was built for them. It is the brick building before you go down. If you're going to Portland, going down to Route 1, there's a hill you go down. And you'll see that big building on the left. They restore it right now. Dr. Southgate, if you wouldn't mind for just a second, he developed the idea of a dike. He was the first one to do it in this country that I know of. He certainly was the first one in Maine. He found that he could not only raise and get saltwater hay, but he could also raise vegetables. If you dike a certain portion of the marsh, it's like a bathtub. You'll see it in just a minute. It's just like putting a wall around a certain section of land. Drying that section of land out. That section of land never gets really out. It's like a sponge. It's a bit moist. Well, he built it, and 2 years later, Mother Nature destroyed it. But he did have the first one, and the first one was around 1802, 1804. That was that time, beginning of the 19th century. Thank you. Yes. We're gonna show you Southgate Company in a little bit, but I wanted to mention that his son Horatio sold the land that his father had bought or picked up, or whatever you want to call it, traded for, and it was then bought from Horatio by people who were in the legislature. And one of the persons in the legislature asked that the state of Maine develop a corporation because we will make the place better. Okay, thank you. Next. I'm trying to let you see how many marshes had whatever they had. So the first dike was 1802. Now we're up to 1870. Okay, we bought the land just before the Civil War. Now there was a dike on the Spurwink Riverside, and the town of Cape Elizabeth, the town of Scarborough cooperated on the management of that dike. Okay, and it was known as the Spurwink Dike. Okay, thank you. And after the Civil War, as you know, we had the Industrial Revolution, but we also had something called the scientific farming. This just shows you that the state of Maine was very much into that, because they did incorporate the Southgate Diking Company. And Seth and 7 other people were involved in that, to the point where he was a legislator, and he's kind of a happy day farmer, not a real one, but he likes farming. He likes other people working. They got the right, not only for land, which they bought from Horatio, but got the right to tax people who had lots on there. If they didn't pay a certain amount for the dike to be built, they were taxed for that amount. I have never seen in any form of government people being taxed by another person. So it was new to me. So he taxed, but another thing that happened in about 1870, 71, he had worked, and the other people with him, on the Little River Dike. Let me talk about that for just a second. The Little River is between Scarborough and Olachit. It's basically in Olachit. It used to drain into the ocean, but they made a deal with Scarborough to dig a ditch called Size Ditch and have it drain into one of the creeks that goes out into the Scarborough River. So all the water from the river goes out that way. It was a very successful operation. So wasn't the Cumberland. Those two dikes were very successful. The Cumberland was in somewhere. I couldn't take you for a field trip and show you where it was, because I really don't know. I tried to find out all this. I knew where the Southgate is. But the Cumberland was in a proximity to the Southgate, north of Eastern Trail. Okay. He was so happy that they were productive. Is when he got the Southgate for me. And now, because people are building dikes, I want to show you how you can build your own. That sheet of paper came from a guy named David Parker, and he was, Parker Smith, and he was a fellow who was very, very interested in dikes. And he was also so happy when he got a call from a person like me saying, I've read your book, I've read your articles. You what? Because they're all academic stuff. So this one piece of paper, if you look at the red line, it all is vertical. You go down vertical, vertical, vertical. Well, we broke them apart. Please, next. Look, see what happens here? There's the river, there's the marsh. Okay, next. We're going to go pretty long. And again, just like children do with the snow forts, we do to build a dike. Okay, we build fairly tall or fairly small. So we're building essentially a bathtub around a certain acreage of land. And speaking of acreage of land, the reason we're doing that, the reason we're going to all this trouble is because we are scientific, you know. And scientific means, how much do you get out of an acre of land? That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to get a lot of crops, whether it be hay or whether it be vegetables, more than they would have gotten without making the dike. Fact one, the Scarborough Marsh, nutrient in the marsh, is the second best in the world. The one ahead of it is would be the forest rainforests that go around the equator. So it was easier to keep kids in Maine than to go out to Illinois with this wonderful, wonderful loam. Very, very good for producing crops, therefore making money. Until Mother Nature gets your hand. So, the next slide, please. The most important thing was to find how to get rid of water and how to stop water. So they had something called a sluiceway. And this is the same one on both sides. See that little thing, that little up here? On both pictures? This thing? They're called sluiceways. They're really, we would call them water barriers, or they have different names. Water gates, you know, anything. But what it does, that flap is so important. They stick it between Mach 1 and Mach 2 squares, okay, which you'll see in just a second. And when it rains or snows, fresh water comes into the marsh, like it would in the bathtub if you're outdoors. And so they developed a rig that said, why not let it go out here? So the man, and you'll see in just a minute, who is digging the squares is also digging a ditch. He gives the square, he digs the ditch. And if the tide comes in, it goes up the sides of the sluiceway and closes it. So salt water can't get in and the fresh water gets out. Okay, the marsh, as many of you know, is the brackish water. It is where salt water and fresh water meet. And we have, as you saw on that map, we have 3 rivers. So that takes we have several streams in the fresh water coming in. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Okay, so if we go on, see the outgoing tide? Okay, incoming tide closes it. So that was an extremely important invention of theirs. Thank you. This shows, this is going to confuse you for a minute, so let me explain it. It shows a man with this scythe. Usually, there'd be 2 to 3, maybe sometimes 4 men side by side, cutting hay. No lawnmowers, no gas, no electricity, remember? And they always did it in August, because they had the longest tides and shortest tides. But the issue I'm trying to tell you is that when they cut it, they kept on going. And behind them were some people with rakes, which you'll see in just a minute. I'm going to show you some of the tools. So making a dike, you need to either make piles, which they did inside the dike. You know, they go along, they'd cut it, and they put these piles up. And then they'd have some way to get it into the barn. There's some ways to walk. See this pole? If you had 2 of those, if I had one end and you had the other end, and we had cod grass between the wood, then the people could come along with their rakes and rake it up and put it on top of the poles. 10 pounds, 30 pounds, 50 pounds, 100 pounds. Then you walk it over the bridge to the barn, and you come back, they pick you up again, and you go back. Now remember, this is in the summer. There's some mosquitoes, there's breeders, there's you name it out there. But that's what they did, but they got tired of it, and they invented something else. Okay? Those are, if you have time to stop the Historical Society, that is now a wall of marsh tools. There are rakes, obviously. And these are the cutting tools, obviously. Okay. I'm going to show you some more. This is, you have seen pictures of a bog shoe. A lot of these shoes that were made by the farmer himself in his barn. And there would be a fellow who was a blacksmith, would come around and make the metal part, the iron part for the horse. And so the horse would step in, you'd have the horse step in all 4, and all you do is tighten up a bolt. And it's like you and I going out on the snow in snowshoes. Because a lot of horses would fall. Because I told you earlier, it's dry, but it's not dry. It's drier, but it's not dry. So they would go down, and of course they'd get excited and raised up and ready to kick you one. Thank you. Now this is what is going to be a little difficult for you. There are 2 kinds of ways to take care of your hay. It is true that it's called a staddle. Okay, the staddle, if you hold your fingers up, it would be like having posts go, it's like telephone poles going into the ground. Okay? And then they would put, again, some cod grass right along the bottom, on the top of the post. And they would pitchfork up the hay until they got a thing that looked like an ice cream cone. Or inside a dike that might just breaks up a little bit, or they leave it on the ground if you're up a little higher, depending where you are. Now, the sigh of relief came from a lot of people. Don't have to carry it anymore. A horse and buggy could go out and get the hay for you. They could either go on a corduroy road if it was really a wet area. They could do that. They certainly would wear their shoes. And that's what he's trying to show up here. Okay, thank you. That's the corduroy road, which is a bunch of logs laid beside each other. That is another kind of box shoe. At one time, Sears and Roebuck sold box shoes. But you can see how it was screwed on to the heel of the horse. Thank you. I want now to show you that the marsh is pretty interesting because you can put something in it and it lasts for years and years and years, just like the weir things. So there are still a few of these staddles around. There's some in the Black Point area, there's some in Pine Point area, and there's one by the Nature Center, on the right of the Nature Center. You're going to see 3 pictures because we want to make it a little closer for you. This one happened to be out in the marsh, and I was out boating with my son one day, and he had his camera, and he took pictures for me. And he tried to make one that was a little closer for you. But they still existed. But when I was a kid, we used to go skating on the salt ponds, and there were all kinds of saddles. The last saltwater haying was done in 1920. In the 20s, not 1920 itself, but in the 20s it stopped. I wanted this because the horse collar, because that was a lifesaver for a lot of people carrying the hay. Now they can yell at the horse, pull it. That was a great invention for them. And the training yoke is another example because they put that on a smaller oxen and have him pull or her pull, whatever. But the animals took over. Okay, I'm going to just divert for just a minute. As I said early on, if there was no marsh, there'd be no clams. Clams eat by ciphering. And they're ciphering the nutritious stuff coming out of the marsh. Okay? Clamming has been a big industry in Scarborough for a lot of years. You're going to see in a few minutes a factory down at Pine Point